Definition of the word.
Wet.
Noun.
Liquid or moisture. Rainy weather.
Example.
Don't go out in the wet. Rainy season. Often capitalized. A moderate conservative, especially one who opposed the hardline policies of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. An alcoholic drink. One who supports the consumption of alcohol and thus opposes prohibition. A tyre for use in wet weather. A weak or sentimental person, a wimp or softy.
Verb.
To cover or impregnate with liquid. To accidentally urinate in or on.
Example.
Johnny wets the bed several times a week. To make or become wet. To form an intermetallic bond between a solder and a metal substrate. To celebrate by drinking alcohol.
Example.
To wet the baby's head. Misspelling of wet. To kill or seriously injure.
Example.
Wet 'em up.
Adjective.
Made up of liquid or moisture, usually, but not always, water.
Example.
Water is wet. Of an object, etc., covered or impregnated with liquid, usually, but not always, water.
Example.
I went out in the rain and now my clothes are all wet. The baby is wet and needs its nappy changed. Of a burrito, sandwich, or other food, covered in a sauce. Of calligraphy and fountain pens, depositing a large amount of ink from the nib or the feed.
Example.
This pen's a wet writer, so it'll feather on this cheap paper. Of a sound recording, having had audio effects applied. Of weather or a time period, rainy.
Example.
It's going to be wet tomorrow. Using afterburners or water injection for increased engine thrust.
Example.
This fighter jet's engine is rated for a maximum wet thrust of 450 kilonewtons, more than twice its max dry thrust, but the afterburner eats up a huge amount of fuel. Of a person. Inexperienced in a profession or task, having the characteristics of a rookie.
Example.
That guy's wet, after all, he just started yesterday. Of women, sexually aroused and thus having the vulva moistened with vaginal secretions.
Example.
He got me all wet. Ineffectual, feeble, showing no strength of character.
Example.
Don't be so wet. Permitting alcoholic beverages. Refreshed with liquor, drunk. Of a scientist or laboratory, working with biological or chemical matter. Employing, or done by means of, water or some other liquid.
Example.
The wet extraction of copper, in distinction from dry extraction in which dry heat or fusion is employed. Involving assassination or, wet work.
Example.
A wet affair, a wet job, wet stuff.
Wet. Wet.
Wet. Wet.
Wet. Wet.
Wet. Wet.